People on Reddit who lost a loved one because of a funny or ironic death. How did you deal with this? Did you feel supported? Story 1. Not a loved one, but perhaps relevant. My uncle helped build large generators for remote villages around the world. He was sent to China where the power plant was in mid-construction. He was given a tour and came across a fairly dangerous hole in the floor that went down several stories. When his coworkers started laughing hysterically, he asked what was so funny. The translator told him that someone had fallen through the hole yesterday morning. When he asked why they thought that was funny, they responded, "It was a safety inspector." Story 2. My grandfather had lost his legs and used a scooter to get around. He was always a prankster and loved to have fun and joke around. His final act was trying to scare someone at a party. He was trying to sneak up on my uncle when he was going around a small hill and tipped his scooter. He broke multiple bones and died from complications. He thought it was hilarious. Story 3. My grandma dropped dead at the dinner table one night and my mom faked CPR to the 911 operator. Grandma had lived with my parents for 5 years before she died, and they discovered that she didn't shower, brush her teeth, or wash her hands after using the bathroom. She'd always get feces everywhere, and it was always under her nails. When she died, my parents called 911, and the operator instructed my mom to give Grandma mouth-to-mouth. My mom, the most honest person I know, couldn't do it. Instead, she faked it and lied to the operator, saying she did it. Needless to say, Grandma didn't wake up. Don't freak out. Grandma had congestive heart failure, and she was a DNR. But in the moment, nobody thought of that. We still make jokes saying Mom killed Grandma. Yeah, my family's messed up like that. Story 4. My mother-in-law's grandfather was born in the Philippines in 1898. He lived to be 105. He survived the Spanish occupation, the American occupation, and the Japanese occupation. He survived the Spanish-American War and the Philippine-American War. He survived World War II. He survived being poor his entire life in a jungle town in a developing country. He outlived some of his kids and grandkids and even a great-grandchild. And though rather senile in the end, he was still running around town until his very last day. He accidentally drank paint thinner, thinking it was gin. He had hundreds of descendants by that point. Even though his passing was tragic, it was hard to say he left too soon. Story 5. I had a coworker whose mother died in a freak accident. She'd been rushing to go to work, got in the car, started it, and realized that she had left her purse on the ground behind her car. So she got out of the car, bent over to pick up her purse, and her car suddenly rolled backward and ran over her, killing her instantly. And then a week later, my coworker was trying to distract himself by watching TV and saw 6 Feet Under was on. That was his mom's favorite show, so he stopped and decided to watch it. Now, if you've seen that show, you know there's a death at the beginning of the episode. The death of that episode? A guy getting run over by his own car. He said it was so shocking and ironic that he couldn't help but laugh about it. Story 6. Not a death, yet, and not a loved one, but in the course of the last couple of years, no less than 3 guys in my organization have been hospitalized because they sucked. Literally, sucked. The first guy had an automatic milking robot that suddenly stopped working. He figured correctly that there was an issue with the highly caustic acid that was used in the maintenance of the machine, which apparently was blocked somehow. So to get the acid flowing again, he sucked on the pipe that it was supposed to run through. And of course, he promptly swallowed a bunch of it. Cue major damage to his throat, a lengthy stay at the hospital, and now he speaks through one of those robot talking devices. Upside, he lost a lot of weight. Then in the course of the next 2 years, this damage repeated itself twice. All of these guys knew each other peripherally, and the 2 other guys had heard about his injury. You'd expect them to learn from his mistakes, but no. Somebody's going to die from sucking acid soon. I can smell it. And farmers, please think about health and safety in your profession. Don't suck on the acid pipe. Story 7. My father died choking on a pretzel many years ago, before the infamous Bush pretzel incident, if anyone's old enough to remember that. I loved pretzels at the time and ate them every day. Couldn't touch them for about a year after his death, and then suddenly pretzels were okay again. Some of my friends and family were appalled, but what was I supposed to do? Be petrified of pretzels for the rest of my life? People die in all sorts of absurd ways, but any death seems a bit absurd to me. How can a person suddenly not be? It's ridiculous, impossible, yet it's something we all have to deal with at some point, the death of family, friends, loves, and ultimately ourselves. I'd like to say I chose to laugh about it, but really, I didn't have much of a choice in my reaction. Death is the universe's ultimate joke. I must laugh. Story 8. My grandfather's heart was 96% clogged for the last 10 years of his life. He had diabetes and 2 forms of cancer. When they found the cancer, he asked the doctor what he should do. The doctor said, well, if you don't treat it, it'll kill you in 3 years. Then he shrugged and said, "But I mean, I wouldn't worry about planning that far ahead." One day, he called up the whole family and said, "This is it. I can feel it. This is the moment. I'm going to die." So everybody came out to be with him. We have family in the Arctic, in Thailand, and in China, and they all came to Ontario to be with him. We sat and talked to him and tried to say comforting things. Personally, I said, "How you doing, Gramps?" He said, "I'm dying. How the hell do you think I'm doing?" We all stood by his side that night, waiting for him. And then the next night, by day 3, my uncle started to get impatient. He started saying, "Yeah, no, I've really got to go to work on Monday." The people who held out the longest stayed for a week, all just sort of waiting for him to die, but he never did. Eventually, though, everyone had to go back to their own lives and we were all just getting bored, so we all moved on. 3 months later, he called again and said he was dying again, but we weren't going to fall for that trick twice. It turned out he was telling the truth that time. Story 9. My friend made a status post almost 2 years ago right after Halloween that read, "Happy Diabetes Awareness Day," pretty much just as a joke. He was found dead a day or two later in his apartment. He died from complications due to diabetes. I never even knew he had it. He was not the nicest person, and he was known for being unapologetically sarcastic, so a lot of people were either apathetic or even straight up happy he died. I keep my sadness over him to myself because most friends weren't really supportive, but looking back at his FB page makes me cry hard and still, to this day, wish he would come back. I miss you, Kyle. Story 10. A friend of mine was an athlete with an amazing body, six-pack and all that jazz. He didn't smoke and drank only occasionally. He dropped dead in the middle of the night in his dorm room due to a natural heart attack. Doctors said his case was very rare and seen only in athletes. In layman's terms, his heart attack was because of his fitness. Story 11. Not a death, but an injury. I didn't have to cope too badly, but I think it's kind of funny. My brother had surgery on his torn left rotator cuff. This meant he had to do everything right-handed, which was a problem for him because he's left-handed. He must not have adopted to the change too well because about 2 weeks after the surgery, he used his right arm to get out of his chair and tore his right rotator cuff. Story 12. Husband's best friend died of 4 bee stings not knowing he was allergic. He was in his 40s. Showed hubby a Parks and Rec episode to try and cheer him up and distract him. Unfortunately, it was the episode where they knocked down the wall to Eagleton during a press conference, and a swarm of bees came out and everyone was running and screaming, "Bees!" Busted out laughing, then looked over to see him cringing. Crap, I tried. Story 13. I just found out about an hour ago that my stepmother has been diagnosed with a very rare and lethal disease. While she isn't my biological mother, she is the closest person to a mother that I ever had. Recently, at the age of 60, she's begun to deteriorate mentally at a rapid pace. This situation is painful irony, and it's not funny. She's easily the most brilliant person I know, and she was just diagnosed with Pick's disease, a rapid and lethal cousin of Alzheimer's that typically presents earlier in life than Alzheimer's. Patients can typically expect a lifespan of about 2 to 10 years after initial diagnosis. This is a woman who has used her brain more than most of our greatest scientific minds would if they had centuries. She's battled social and cultural norms her whole life, as well as a rare form of cancer. She was born and raised in Belarus and was exposed to the fallout from the Chernobyl meltdown, which resulted in her developing an extremely rare form of cancer. The name of the cancer escapes me, but it was rare enough that doctors from some of the finest medical institutions in the Boston area were fighting to work on her case. She was one of the first women allowed to leave the former USSR independently. She did so as a teacher, first teaching in Japan. However, in exchange for letting her go abroad, she had to report back to the KGB about daily activity in Japan from her perspective. She was careful to keep her body as sharp and well-maintained as her mind, and was an impressive athlete as well. She qualified for Olympic trials for the Russian speed skating team, but fell just short of making the team. She swam 5 miles in the Atlantic Ocean every day, summer or winter, until the cancer and corresponding treatment made this everyday task impossible for her. Ever the consummate academic, she persisted in her studies and ultimately earned 3 PhDs in fields related to theology and philosophy. 3 PhDs. Most people spend their whole life earning just 1. She was also a distinguished polyglot, boasting the ability to speak 13 different languages, although most of them were related to the Slavic/Russian languages. She was still fluent in Spanish, English, and French as well. And when she wasn't teaching, she would supplement her time by translating, whether it was corporate documents or an episode of The Simpsons for Russian television. She taught at many fine colleges in the Boston area, including Brown, BU, BC, and others. While teaching, she underwent treatment for her rare form of cancer. Out of fear that she would be fired if the colleges ever caught wind of her disease, She would go to teach a class a day after receiving her chemo treatments, wearing a wig so as to keep no one the wiser. If anyone has ever undergone or known someone who has undergone chemo, it takes a serious physical and mental toll on a person. To get up the next day and teach theology at an Ivy League institution is nothing short of superhuman. But in the end, she beat the cancer she received from one of the greatest man-made disasters ever recorded, an event so large that the scale of destruction will likely never be realized. But now, the most brilliant, intelligent, and hardworking person I know will succumb to a disease that destroys the mind. I'd like to think that the fragile structure of our human shells couldn't contain her brilliance, but in the end, it just seems like cruel irony. I learned about this an hour ago while working with a client and a metal fabricator in another country to test their equipment. I didn't know what to tell my father. I felt myself grasping. Story 14. The doctors had always told my chain-smoking great-grandfather that cigarettes would kill him, and sure enough, at 94 years old, he was fatally hit by a cigarette truck while crossing the street. Story 15. Not a person, but my boyfriend and I lost a beloved dog because he tripped over her and fell on top of her. He's a big guy. I tried to talk about it a couple of times right after it happened, but people laughed their asses off. Not even so much as a sorry, since it was just a dog, I guess. Now I generally tell people that she died in an undisclosed accident. Story 16. Some relative in my wife's family was ripped off by a pop machine, so he started shaking it. It topples over on top of him and kills him. Apparently, it was quite a slow death, too. It was the middle of the night outside of a gas station which was closed for the night. An employee found him in the morning. My wife nor her family likes to talk about it. My wife just gets a nod in her face if somebody even mentions it. I'm told he was a really good guy, early 20s with lots of friends, a good job, and a long-term girlfriend. That was about 20 years ago, give or take, long before I even met my wife. It seems to me that the coroner's inquest found that the pop machine was full and very top-heavy. After a bunch of tests, it was revealed that it took very little effort to make it fall forward. So the coroner asked, or forced, the vending machine manufacturers to change their designs. There's a running joke in the area for quite some time, which I'm sure didn't help the family grieve. What kind of drink was he trying to get? Orange Crush? Story 17. Four-wheelers and my family don't go together. About 7 years ago, my second cousins got 3 four-wheelers and went out behind their house, going through their acres of land they had. There was a steep area, and being new and stupid, my 8-year-old cousin went over and it flipped, killing him. Not but 2 months later, they took them out again to go to the place and hold a vigil. Well, my uncle and 12-year-old cousin flipped over a few times and smashed into a tree in that very same area. My uncle died immediately, and my cousin died 2 days later. It was really sad. My dad and I heard about it a second time, and we both said, they didn't learn the first time? They weren't always the smartest people. My aunt and, at the time, and 10-year-old cousin were devastated. They stayed with us for a few weeks as we helped empty the house and sell everything, especially the damn four-wheelers. Flash forward to 2 years ago, my sister takes another 15-year-old cousin from another aunt and uncle out to her boyfriend's house. He has a few four-wheelers, and he is very good in them. She decides to get on his, and her cousin gets on with the boyfriend's brother. Well, they were having a bit of fun and really pushing them. The boyfriend's brother hits a bump hard, knocking my cousin off, not holding on enough, and she lands on a tree branch with the part sticking up and now into her throat. My sister is a nurse, but a few miles out from civilization and with a cut to the carotid artery, she made it back to the house before dying. When we got a call, I thought it was going to be both of them or my sister. After that, my family's matriarch, my family has one, and if she says it, we do it, decided no more four-wheelers. I know my second cousins still have snowmobiles, so those might be safe since none of them have died yet. Better yet, my boss invited me to go four-wheeling and snowmobiling this last winter. I declined. Story 18. My great-grandmother died by slipping on a banana peel, falling into the corner of a table, and puncturing her lung on it. People try really hard not to laugh when I tell them.